All right, we are on the home stretch now. Question 56. Firm XYZ produces and sells corn in a perfectly competitive marketplace. So remember, perfect competition gives us a horizontal demand curve, right? You're a price taker, not a price maker, so you only see one price. And hires its workers in a perfectly competitive labor market. Now this flips the coin a little bit. It's a perfectly competitive labor market, so this is not the situation where you're a seller, you're now the buyer. And if you're the buyer, you're just going to have a regular demand curve. Which of the following best describes the demand curve for XYZ's corn and XYZ's demand curve for labor? So we kind of just went over that. So XYZ corn, um, uh, demand curve for their corn as a supplier is going to be horizontal, right? Because that's what we have in perfect competition. But yet, on the other side of the coin, when you are the purchaser, you see just a regular downward sloping curve. So here the answer to 56 would be B. All right, number 57. A monopolistically competitive firm advertises in order to. So you advertise in order to sell more product at higher prices, right? So let's see what the choices are. Shift the demand curve for its products to the left. Well, if you shift it to the left, that means that the market's going to demand less of your product, so that is not correct. Make the demand for its product less price elastic. So remember, an inelastic demand curve looks like this, nice and vertical, which means that people are always going to demand a certain quantity no matter what their price is, right? So this way you could get very high prices by just small changes in the quantity. But essentially, with the inelastic curve, there's always a very strong demand for a certain amount, and you would like that as a seller. An elastic demand curve goes all the way across the spectrum for quantities because people are not willing to pay higher prices. They'll pay one price, but if the price goes up a little, they'll just tail off and not buy very much at all. So by making your demand curve products less price elastic, that means more inelastic, right? You get this vertical curve, and that would be really good for sales. That means there's always demand for your product. So let's take a look at the choices. Make its product more similar to other competitors. There's no reason why you'd want to make it more similar. Then you'd have more substitution and more competition, so that's no good. Increase its positive externalities. So a positive externality is something that creates something good for a third party, which is not something we have here. So the example for positive externalities is that you have education. So if a school educates somebody, that's good for the person getting the education. But in general, society also is better when more people are educated. So that's a positive externality. But as a monopolistically competitive firm, you're not really worried about that. You're worried about making more income. So that would not be correct for this problem, or certainly not better than choice B. And finally, E, reduce the industry's barriers to entry. And boy, that would be the worst thing you could do because then you'd have more competition. So here the answer is B. Okay, number 58 again is going to flip our understanding of the problem, or flip the way we've been thinking about this, because we've been thinking of things as a supplier. But here we ask, a profit maximizing firm should hire an input up to the point at which. So we know if we're a supplier, we always produce till the marginal cost equals the marginal revenue. But on the flip side, when you're hiring, you're going to be doing something which is very similar but a little bit different. So let's take a look at the choices. Marginal physical product equals marginal revenue product. So the marginal physical product is the extra amount of product you get from hiring. Let me tell you. So the marginal physical product is the amount of extra product you get from hiring an additional labor, and the marginal revenue product is the amount of income you get for that extra product being produced. And that doesn't take into consideration cost at all, so that certainly can't be the correct answer. Now B says marginal revenue equals the marginal factor cost. Now remember, marginal revenue we talked about when we were the supplier, and that's the amount of money we get for an extra product that we sell into the marketplace. Marginal factor cost is the extra amount we pay to hire labor. So they're comparing two different things. Because when we're talking about hiring, we're talking about something called the marginal revenue product. And that's the marginal revenue you get from hiring somebody who could produce an extra product. So B is not correct, which is kind of alluding to the fact that we want to compare marginal revenue product to marginal factor cost. So marginal revenue product equals marginal factor cost, and that is correct. But let's just take a look at the other choices. C, marginal revenue product equals marginal revenue, and again, this is comparing two different concepts. The concept here of revenue product is what you get from hiring additional people, and this is what you get from selling. So this is not going to be correct. And finally, E, marginal physical product equals marginal factor cost. Again, this is now physical product, like we saw here up in A, to factor cost, which is not correct because you want to take a look at marginal revenue product to the factor cost, so that one is not correct. So for this problem, the answer here is D. Okay, this graph is going to go on to be used for question 59 and 60. Let's take a look at what's going on here. So we have a marginal social benefit curve that looks like this, and then we have marginal private cost. So this is the cost of supplying the product. That's the normal supply curve. And then we have this new concept here, the marginal social cost, right? So social cost is different than private cost. This is the cost to make it, and this is cost to society in general. And you can imagine that you could have things that you could make, for instance, alcohol, which has a certainly finite amount you could produce alcohol for, but it has a negative impact to society, right? So if people are getting drunk and causing car accidents all the time, then its social cost is going to be much higher than just the cost of making it. Okay, so let's take a look at number 59. The socially optimal quantity and the per unit tax that will achieve the socially optimal quantity are which of the following? Okay, so just like we saw in any supply and demand curve, the social cost and the marginal social benefit intersect right here. So this is going to be the socially optimal quantity and the socially optimal price. Now, without anybody getting involved, if he does a private enterprise, the private enterprise would produce this amount because that's what people want. So how do you get people to buy this amount? Is you put a tax in. And the tax is what's going to be used to shift the supply curve up to this point here. So the tax amount is going to be P3 minus P1, which we find right here on choice D. And the socially optimal quantity was at Q2, which we find here and here. So here the choice is going to be. Okay, last question. Given the position of the marginal social cost curve, one can conclude that the private cost of producing good X exceeds the social cost. Well, we know that that's not true. We know that the private cost is less than the social cost, so that is not correct. Production of good X creates a negative externality. So that's exactly what we're seeing here. We're seeing that whatever they're selling has a higher social cost, and I think alcohol is a good example. So the alcohol and the negative effects from alcohol is a negative externality to a third party, and it increases your social cost, so that is a correct answer. But let's just take a look at the other choices. C, production of good X occurs in an imperfectly competitive marketplace, and we see no reason to conclude that there's an imperfect marketplace here. D, market quantity Q3 is socially optimal, and we know that's not correct because in the first answer we saw that it was Q2, so that is not right. And then finally, free market will produce too little of good X, and the truth is we saw that actually the free market without the tax produced actually more, not less, so that is not correct. So here the choice is B.